And here we go. So I would like to introduce you to our first speaker. His name is Adamsen, and Al is the founder and the CEO. Hello, Al. Hello, Al is, by the way, what is your time now? I think it's early morning. Is that right?
It is 4:07 a.m.
Oh, great.
Here in California.
So this is how you start your working day with us. It's wonderful.
This is close to normal. It's not exactly normal, but
absolutely wonderful. Yes. So Al is all about people data for good, and he is actually globally recognized through thought leader and advisor and educator in the areas of people analytics. And we're really happy to have him here at his 4 o'clock in the morning. And Alan was very well known in the areas of people analytics and talent strategy and workforce planning, and I could name many more. So he's the key influence in people analytics. So I'm very happy to greet all you here. I will stop my demonstration and then certainly you can share your presentation.
Absolutely. Let's see if I can do this elegantly. And first off, Anna, thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this event. I'm very excited to be sharing with you all. And as Anna shared, that I'd like to make this a discussion. Even though I have been in the people analytics space for 20 years, actually over 20 years now, I come into these discussions as a learner. So I'm going to take some of the insights and perspectives of leading practitioners throughout these 20 years, academics and others, technologists who have built tools to facilitate people analytics. But I don't come from a knowing place. I come from a very curious learning place. So I invite you to do the same. So as I share, open your mind and ask, what if we did that? What would it be like if we changed our approach here? Because again, while I'm sharing some models and ideas on how to make people analytics work in your organization, and frankly, how it'll affect you, I really believe that what's going to be appropriate for your organization is going to be, it has to be created. It's not going to just, okay, Google does that or some other big company does that. What is going to be appropriate for your organization has to be created. So with that, Anna, may I jump in and start?
Yeah, sure. Just also want to tell our beautiful audience that you can ask as many questions as you want in the chat. I will collect all them, and I certainly will ask all these questions after. So within the time limits, unfortunately we have it, I will try to answer them. So please go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And here we go. So balancing well-being, inclusion, engagement, and performance. So many organizations have these competing asks of HR. Leaders want, particularly with COVID and remote work, they want better well-being. There's a lot of people who've been burnt out. And particularly here in the States, we want to create feelings of inclusion in our organization. There's been a host of social factors that have made that a big priority. Engagement has been around for a long time, 25 plus years, as a construct to really guide culture. And of course, leaders want people to perform. They want people to contribute in certain meaningful ways. So how can we, through data and analytics and workforce planning, facilitate that? And I will share one of the struggles we've had in years past from getting that done, but now we're in a different place. So these are the questions we'll be addressing over our time together. And by the way, I'll go for about 45, 50 minutes, and then I'll open it up for a Q&A. If you have questions as we go, of course, put them in the chat. Otherwise, I will look at those once we finish in about, like I said, 45 minutes or so. So what's the reality of business that businesses are dealing with today around the world? What's needed by leaders, managers, HR, and workers themselves? Again, I'm going to emphasize the fact that workers play a role in people data and analytics strategy. But before we even talk about that, we have to define what people analytics is and what it is not. So I'm going to create some definitions for us so we're literally on the same page. And how does people analytics fit into an overarching HR talent or workforce or people strategy, whatever you call it, in your organization? What are leading practice companies doing? Where are we heading into the future? What do we need to be planning for? And what do I personally need to do regardless of my role? Not all of you, I'm sure, are people analytics professionals, whether you be an HR business partner, business leader, someone who's entering the workforce and just curious about the future of work and how data is going to impact it. We're going to talk about the role of the individual as well. So unsurprisingly, you're probably looking at that list going, oh my gosh, how's he going to get through all that in 15 minutes or 45 minutes? I'm going to go fast. That's how. So I ask you to stick with me. I'm going fast for a reason. I go fast because I want you to have a systematic view of what this work is. I can't just take a piece and all of a sudden, okay, how does that fit into the greater context? I'm going to create the greater context, and then we're going to talk about how it fits in. So here we go. So who am I? I'm a dad. So that's how I start all conversations when I'm in person or online like this. This work matters to me because it matters to my kids. It matters to my community. So I grew up in what I call the suck it up generation. You're just lucky to have a job. This is the way it is. Just do your job. My kids, who are 20 and 18 now, are growing up in a different generation. And they're saying, hey, I don't like it the way it's working here. I'm going to go somewhere else. And particularly given the supply-demand relationship for talent in many job families, they have choices. So employers thus have to be really smart about the cultures that they create. The employee value proposition, the promise that they're making people, is that actually realized when they come into the company? So this is what people analytics can do, and we're going to talk about that. Beyond that, I created the capability of Gap Inc. in the early 2000s. I worked with Inform, which was one of the early vendors in the people analytics space, became part of Success Factors and then SAP. I was a leader at Connexa, which became part of IBM. And for the past 14, 15 years, I've been running peer groups and conferences on people analytics, future of work, workforce planning, talent strategy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee experience, and the like. So right now, I'm an influencer, community organizer, and I do that under the brand PAFOW. And we can be found at pafow.net. And we're all about, yes, people data for good. What is that? Promoting the ethical and responsible use of people data analytics and AI for the benefit of individuals, first and foremost, teams, groups, including diversity groups, organizations, and society at large. So it's a very ambitious mission. But again, it's just not for analytics' sake. It is really about doing good in the world with the use of people data and analytics. So Rob Cross is one of my heroes. He just came out with a book called Beyond Collaborative Overload. And the essence of collaborative overload is that with the introduction of technologies into many, if not all of our business processes now, we have become overloaded with the number of touch points that people can hit us with, that technologies themselves through AI hit us with, and automated problems and notifications. So now we're getting to this place where oh my gosh, we're literally overloaded. And that relates to another one of my heroes who presented at our last in-person conference here in the United States, Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer from Stanford. He wrote a book, among many others, called Dying for a Paycheck. And it echoes this reality, is that people are literally dying for a paycheck here in the United States, and it needs to stop. And frankly, around the world, people are overworked, they're underappreciated, and they're leaving, but sometimes they have to stay in that job, and they're suffering a great deal. And part of our role in people data and analytics is to highlight where the suffering is taking place and do what we can to alleviate that suffering. So with that in mind, I want to take this tact, and I celebrate People First Data as the naming convention for this conference. I get it. But what I would like you all to do for the balance of our time together is appreciate and explore this concept that people are data. And this is not my thought. This is Ed Franken at MIT years ago, who was effectively contending the whole universe is data. Yes, think about the movie The Matrix. Absolutely. But as soon as we see somebody, we're putting data in our heads about that individual. Plus, in a more practical, pragmatic way these days, we're creating this data exhaust all over, and there's certain assumptions and conclusions that we're drawing based on that data. Therefore, we must work with data, not against it. In other words, data can be useful and it can be something that can be leveraged for good. It's not something to be feared. Actually, I take that back. We should have appropriate fear, in my view, around data and augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence, but it's not something that we should just run away from. It's something that we have to work with. Okay. So some concepts we'll talk about today: well-being versus performance, capability and capacity. Capability is skills, capacity is we're all limited by time, and I'll talk about that. Inclusion leads to engagement, so it's not mutually exclusive. We'll talk about the data to change process, talent strategy and workforce planning, continuous work transformation, and the best next steps for you and your organization. So here we go. Well-being and performance. These, in many respects, are polar counterbalancing constructs. What I mean by that is, if we, given my background as an economics professional, we model things. So if in the extreme, if a human being works 24 hours a day and creates 20 paintings an hour, over the course of 24 hours, and they don't sleep, they're going to perform really, really well. They're going to have horrible well-being, and they're going to pass away after a week or so because our bodies can't hold up. The other side of the coin is that if someone works 1 hour a week and they're getting paid like a full-time worker, yeah, they have great well-being, they're going to the beach, they're having fun, but they're not producing. So we have to find something in between. And I would argue that most organizations here in the United States anyway have leaned way over to performance. We've created this culture of productivity. You have to produce. You need to be a high performer to get the next job, to get the compensation bonus that you're looking for. And that has compromised well-being, particularly with COVID. As a result, we have the great resignation happening here. We have many women leaving the workforce, and it's not a good situation, particularly in certain job families like nursing, where there's a gross undersupply of talent. So we have to find this balance, and not many leaders, not many HR organizations know where this balance lies on a job family level, let alone an individual level. And I'm writing an article right now on organizational elasticity, which actually goes down to the individual and their elasticity day to day. In other words, how much can they flex given the requirements of life? So with that as an idea, I want to introduce you to the four burners model, or four burners theory. And we have these ways that we would cut off certain things to be quote unquote successful. And a recent study by Question Pro contends that most of us, the 600 respondents to this survey that is, will actually sacrifice their work productivity to maintain their well-being. They would sacrifice their health less, their family less, and their friends the most. It's like, hey, if I want to be successful, this is the trade-off. This is what I'm willing to sacrifice to get where I want to go. But it does invite the question, why does this have to be the case? Can we have healthy relationships? Can we take care of our bodies and be productive and happy at work? Therein lies the challenge. So again, from the Question Pro survey, 36% feel burned out very often. 46%, almost half the respondents to the survey, feel burned out sometimes. And you can see rarely or never is almost, it's just not happening. In other words, people are burned out either sometimes or very often, most of the time. And it's really, really a sad reality given all the stress that's happening in the world. So how can we as employers, particularly those employers that are doing really well financially, offset this so we can actually have people who are going to stick around? Because again, taking the survey, how often do you feel burnt out at work? That's the red bar here. How often do you feel energized at work? You can see 82% of the respondents we're actually saying that I feel burned out sometimes or very often. And you can see almost 1 in 5 never feel energized in their job. That's not good. That's not good. So what can we do? Here's the reality that we're dealing with as we try and problem solve. There's 6 seismic shifts that I believe that are happening in the world today, and particularly in the business world, that are affecting these dynamics. And I was going to build this, but I'm just going to, in the interest of time, just share it in one go here. As I mentioned, the Great Resignation. Many people are either leaving their jobs currently, or they're thinking about leaving their jobs. And there's data to support this, and it's a scary situation for employers. We have now vaccine mandates in many parts of the United States. There are people refusing to take the vaccine, thus they're likely going to get laid off, which is going to exacerbate labor shortages. There's hybrid work, of course, people coming into the office maybe 1 or 2 times a week as opposed to full time. So they're working remotely. When they're working remotely, they're dealing with children, they're dealing with elder care. So the dynamics and productivity are different, and people are having more meetings, and it's affecting well-being, and I'll get into that in a second. We have data analytics and AI, and of course we're going to talk about that. Skills shortages, not across the board. It's not a function, arguably, that we're lacking people. It's we're lacking people with the right skills. And of course, globalization. As we talk about a work strategy, it's, hey, work can get done by workers down the street or people on the other side of the globe. And that's affecting our workforce strategy, which is going to affect, how we plan to do work day to day. So these shifts, frankly, many of them aren't going to go away anytime soon. So are organizations prepared? No, most are not. And frankly, I know even leading companies are trying to figure this out now. And we're going to talk about some of the things that I'm saying, some of the things that I'm hearing to actually get to a better place where leaders are more confident that they're creating the culture that they want. But here's the reality, just to summarize. We have people with pressure and problems at work. There's change always required. There's very complex collaborative overload, work-life juggle. We're asked to do more with less. And it's this case where we're feeling overloaded and underproductive. I just highlighted some data that supports that. So what are we going to do? Well, this is what I strongly advocate, is that people want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want to be empowered. And in data and analytics and people strategy, we have the opportunity to do just this. So it sounds good. Yeah. How do you want to see people? How do you want to hear people? How do you empower people? Well, on a person-to-person basis, this is what I advocate. I advocate something what I call OQIs, observations, questions, and idea. Hey, this is what I observe. Stay in curiosity, that growth mindset from Carol Dweck. Hey, I hear you. Is this really what's happening? Ask what's going on so you can get to the root cause of the problem, or uncover the opportunity, and then offer ideas. Particularly knowledge workers, rarely do they want to be told what to do. They want to be empowered to create their own way forward. So on a micro sense, this is a way to have conversations. I don't like the term feedback. I wrote an article years ago called Feedback is Garbage. And effectively, it was a call to define what feedback actually is. Again, I don't like being told what to do. I'm sure many of you do not. What I like are people to co-create with me, but they can only co-create with me after I'm convinced that they see and hear me. When they start making assumptions and I know they don't have enough information to offer ideas, that's when I and others shut down. So that's on a micro level, person-to-person level. How can we do this at a macro level, at scale? So that's where data and analytics, continuous listening, continuous dialogue come in. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So here we are as human beings. We're trying to contribute. We're trying to perform. We're trying to get things done. And the reality is that we are all, as human beings, constrained by time. And this is like no duh statement, but it is the reality that we are just pushed and pushed and pushed in many organizations to do more and more and more. And those that are being elevated, and again, there's data to support this, are having either a stay-at-home partner, or they don't have kids at all, so they have more capacity to devote to work. Now, is that just something that has to happen? Is that fair? That is an ethical decision to be made by leaders in a business and society at large. But here is the reality that was beyond the shadow of a doubt. If that people are performing and they don't have well-being, they're going to be burned out. If they have low performance and low well-being, they're just going to shut off and they're going to leave. If they are having good well-being and they're not performing, yeah, they're bouncing around, the office and engaged in their work, but they're not going to stick around because they're not delivering as is hoped. This is where we want people, that we want them switched on. We want them to have good well-being and contributing in meaningful, productive ways. And how can we do this at scale? Well, from an HR perspective or people analytics perspective, we have all these initiatives. We have a well-being initiative. We have an engagement initiative. Some organizations have resilience initiatives. We want diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives, performance initiatives, or productivity initiatives. They're all over the place. Our challenge and opportunity is to bring all these together. And not only these, but there are more concepts in the background. And what we really need to get to is a place where we have an integrated talent strategy. Again, this disparate project to project, function to function approaches can no longer work given the 6 seismic shifts that I mentioned before. You want me to mumble that again? The 6 seismic shifts that I mentioned before. But this invites the question, what is a talent strategy? Glad you asked. A talent strategy looks like this. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through it in detail. Just suffice it to say, it accounts for how we're going to acquire talent, how we're going to develop talent, how we're going to reward talent, and how we're going to communicate and create a culture for that talent. There's processes and functions, and there's technology, certainly. And the overarching construct in many organizations now is the idea of a worker or employee experience. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit. But the worker employee experience applies design thinking in many cases to understand the journey a worker goes through. There's data underneath that journey, and that data needs to be consciously created. So let's, before we refer to this again, I want us to step back and think about our role in organizations. So if you're a people analytics professional, you're a supplier of information and insight. If you're an HR business partner, for example, you are creating context and you're communicating the insight downstream to an internal customer, a business leader, for example, and he or she is consuming that information and insight and making decisions. Sometimes we just hand that deliverable downstream. Sometimes we partner with the HR business partner, if we're a people analytics professional, for example, and go to that end customer in a presentation. Other times, as a people analytics professional, we're creating products that is consumed by the end customer, and we don't see how they're using it. So this is where we're designing products. And I know David Yang is going to talk about that later today. Ultimately, what we want to do is create stories that inspire confidence for that end decision maker. So what inspires confidence? Well, data and analytics and how it's packaged and told. It's not all about the data and analytics. As we all know, it's one thing to have great insight. It's another thing to have that communicated in a very strategic, meaningful way. So when we look at the worker experience, I prefer worker because in this day and age, yes, employee experience gets a lot of the press, But really, people doing work in organizations now, they're not only employees, they're contractors, they're partners, outsourced providers, a variety of human beings, but they're not all employees. So I'm recognizing that and calling that out. But for employees, you have these applicants, they come on board, they become tenured, they might be a high potential, high performer, they get promoted, and they contribute over time, and then they exit the organization, become alumni. Underpinning this experience are all these systems. Within all these systems, there are data. And this data has historically been HR technology, and it's been within the organization. Over the past 5-6 years, there has been what I'll call behavioral data that's been introduced into the people analytics domain. This has been organizational or social network analysis, looking at email traffic, meeting duration and frequency, and a variety of other metrics that has enhanced the story of what is happening in a given organization. Add further tools like LinkedIn and Glassdoor and educational, and here in the States, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, so government data. We have this massive trough of people data. So we can understand not only what's happening within our organization, we can understand what's happening in the greater talent market, and that's going to inform our talent strategy. So given that, we're in this quandary. When I started in this work, we were at a competitive disadvantage because we had too little data. We're now at a competitive advantage in many organizations because we have too much data. We don't know what to look at. It's scary, it's overwhelming. So here's part of our challenge, is find the optimal quantity of information and quality. And here's where we're going to have a source of competitive advantage. And this is highlighted in a book by Nate Silver, Signal and the Noise, which is behind me, which is one of the great books that I recommend to people analytics, or aspiring people analytics professionals. There are books that are more spot on appropriate now, but it's something and a concept that I would encourage you to be aware of. In many of those books, you'll see, oh, I went the wrong direction. You'll see this construct where you go from reports, dashboards, do some more sophisticated analytics, and you get up to AI and predictive and maybe even prescriptive analytics. So if you've seen this before, and with all due respect to those who have introduced these concepts over the years, I'd like you to get rid of this mental model. We can discuss it, we can argue about it, but for right now, I invite you to just get it out of your head. Why? If I take that same curve and I apply it in these 3 buckets where we have basic HR metrics and reporting, which is never going away. That job is never over because we have acquisitions, we have new systems and processes. It's work that always need to be done. We also need to do basic descriptive statistics and workforce planning. And yes, we can do advanced analytics both in an automated form and using advanced statistical techniques. We can do it all the time. But what I advocate is we do this. We bring it all forward. You want to see that again? Let's do that again. Let's bring it all forward. Why? Because if you're pushing out reports, if you're a people analytics professional or someone who works with HR metrics, what does your internal customer say? They say, well, so what? What is this telling me? What's the action? What can actually answer that question? Analytics. It can actually, if you juxtapose or triangulate that data next to other relevant data to create better context and meaning, and in turn action, that's a good thing. So we have to recognize that these 3 work streams, if you will, take place simultaneously all the time in leading practice companies. And this has been validated over the past 15, 20 years. So please take my word for that. If the idea that we're going to wait, you're never going to get there. You have to start the work and you have to learn. And I'm going to come back to that concept later. So going back to our supplier, partner, internal customer depiction, historically, people analytics professionals and those downstream consumers of the insight have been content, sometimes consciously, oftentimes, however, unconsciously. They've been content being customers of the data that has resided with those internal systems. And that's how I started in this work. And it was very frustrating because leaders wanted certain questions answered. And I could not answer them because I did not have the appropriate data. Well, what requires me and other analysts to get the appropriate data? Well, we have to be involved in the decisions around what technologies are selected, what processes are going to be implemented, what data are going to be generated, what metrics are going to be generated. So this is what I strongly advocate, is that people, analytics professionals, and other partners get in front of this, because often the end consumer, the business leaders, the strategists in this depiction are actually those who are authorizing and commissioning projects for new technologies. But there's been a blind spot. There's been these technologies that have been adopted, and the downstream effects on data and analytics have not been considered until later. And that cannot happen. Data and analytics needs to be in the decision-making process of key technology decisions that affect not only HR, workers, in other words, but how the business functions, whether it be digital transformation or implementing AI or partnering with outsourced providers or whatever, because that's going to affect their data and how they contextualize it and tell stories. So we design, we have the right data, analytics, and then the insight downstream. So appropriate questions, appropriate data, appropriate analytics generates the appropriate insight, and finally, the appropriate action can take place. So please hold on to that idea. So a few more slides here, and then I'm going to turn it over to questions. So to put this in a broader context, we have an analytics maturity progression. Okay, analytics hopeful is just getting the data right. Analytics doer, you're just doing it on what I call an event-driven basis or ad hoc basis. Say, hey, we'll do analytics, we'll just study this concept. If you're an analytics user, you're actually creating analytics and insight on an ongoing, recurring basis, say once a quarter or once a month, whatever the frequency is for your organization. But the primary customer is an executive or a group of executives. If you are going to be an analyst competitor, then you're not only doing it for executives, you've quote unquote operationalized the insight, and you've made it available to managers and hopefully workers themselves on how they can navigate their career, find projects, and a variety of other value-added insights that, again, leading practice companies have now. This is captured in this concept of an article I wrote a few years ago called People Analytics 3.0. 1.0, again, doing it on an event-driven basis. 2.0, systematizing it, and it's been going around for about 20 years. 3.0 is really, we're automating the solutions and having it be more broadly distributed. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through these. You are going to get the deck, so I'll anticipate that question. So these are the 7 keys for people analytics success. I just want you to see it right now, and I want you to know that that first one is really around defining what terms are. And again, I'm going to go faster right now. But I love this Chinese proverb: the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names. Maybe not Russian music, yeah, you have something similar, but you get the idea, is that we have to be talking the same language. So people analytics, what the heck is it? Well, if you talk to analysts and researchers, there's a lot of terms: natural language processing, structural equation modeling, linear regression, stepwise regression, conjoint analysis, scenario planning, Bayesian statistics, which actually I'm a fan of, random forest, all this stuff. And that's a process by which to do analytics. The deliverable really is insight. So let's hold on to that construct. And insight can be generated through these 3 means, as I mentioned before. Again, I'm just going to leave this up here for a brief second, just so you know it exists. And this article is actually on my LinkedIn profile if you ever want to see it. But what I want to go to now is the data to change process, because we have all this data and we have all this stuff happening downstream. And what we need to do is understand that this is different activities, and very few human beings have all the skills and knowledge to take data out of systems and communicate it down, to an internal customer. So in other words, we have all this knowledge embedded within an organization. action is taking place all the time. Leaders are making decisions all the time. So herein lies our opportunity. We have to bridge the gap. We have to get the data out of those systems, package it, communicate it, so it can actually inform action. That's going to reduce risk and increase confidence that we're making the right decisions for the organization. So 3 work streams conceptualized. Strategic really is the executives. Operational is the people analytics team, including HR. Technical is just that. It's the technologists, those who are implementing the systems and housing the data. And we need governance across these 3 work streams, which in many organizations is lacking. And I'm going to talk about governance 3 or 4 times over the next 10 minutes, and then I'll be done. So if I take those 2 concepts and overlay them, here's what the reality of leaders are. They don't care what HR technologies we have. They just want the insight when they want it for the purpose that they want it so they can move forward. Similarly, technologists have very little visibility into how the data that they're generating and stewards of is going to be used downstream. Therefore, we in the operational work stream, whether it be HR or people analytics professionals, need to understand the whole data to change process, who is within that process, what technologies are there, and how to, again, facilitate governance ongoing across this process so things don't break down. If one of those pillars breaks down, then the process stops. So this is something that we all have to be cognizant of. So to back up yet again, understanding the data change process, that is really for people insights and how you inform workforce strategy. But from a more macro level, and this is where I'm spending a lot of my time on the future of work, is how does work get done and who does the work? Well, if you go back 10 years, or actually 2008, 2009, we had a global financial crisis and organizations reduced the number of employees. They elevated the number of consultants and contractors they use, and outsourced providers, and globalization meant that, hey, we're going to have partners do the work who are specializing in certain areas. Now, with COVID, same thing happened. There were staff reductions, reliance on contingent labor, both consultants and contractors increased. And now we're leveraging the use of AI to do work. And I'll emphasize that for me, when I say AI, augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence, while distinct, I could say augmented intelligence is arguably in this day and age more appropriate and influential than artificial intelligence. Now, we can argue about that all day, but that's what I'm seeing, particularly as it affects work strategy. And I use that term intentionally, work strategy. So again, workforce planning process, I want you to know it's here. The essence of this is that we have a current head count. We're going to have people leave the organization over the course of time, say a year. We have this certain demand for talent given our business strategy. That's going to suggest that we have a gap if we're a growing organization. Then it invites the question, how are we going to fill that gap? Most organizations have said, okay, I'm going to just hire people. Well, that's not a workforce plan. That's a headcount plan to inform recruiting. What a true workforce plan is, hey, how am I going to elevate people? How am I going to redesign the organization? How am I going to bring in an outsourced provider to help reduce the number of employees I need to do this body of work? So this is the essence of a workforce plan at a high level. To go to a more detailed level, I'd like you to think about capability, capacity, cost, and construct. Capability, skills, capacity, the limitation human beings have, the cost, how much we're paying them, and construct, how they're organized. And this is captured in the more detailed workforce planning process, where you have an internal view of your organization, you audit your internal supply. An external view, you audit your labor pools, and that informs your recruiting strategy. You can forecast that applicant pool. Similarly, you can have an internal development strategy. You forecast your internal supply of talent at a certain level. Now you can start playing with how the org is designed. Meanwhile, you have a business strategy and associated budget that informs a talent demand that I just mentioned. And now you have this gap, and this is where I really like to spend time, is now you can do talent capacity planning and labor modeling, and that informs your org design and thus your development strategy and recruiting strategy and all this. It sounds complex. But when you unbundle this work to functions, it's a unifying framework. So that's why we have it. So as I start to wrap up now, many of you probably have HR transformations happening in your organizations. You likely have digital transformation, business transformation, IT transformation. What this really is to me is work transformation. And this is where we were heading before COVID. But now you overlay COVID and it's like, oh my gosh, we have all these crisis management teams. Oh, everybody has to work from home. Safety is a big priority. Hey, IT, how are we going to enable people to work from home? So now you have these groups coming together that formerly didn't exist to formulate a work strategy, how work is actually going to get done. Now, I would like to see those groups stick together. In many organizations, they are. And what are they doing? Well, they're facilitating what I call continuous work transformation. And who more qualified to facilitate discussions around continuous work transformations than HR, and more specifically, people analytics and people strategy. We have to get these formerly disparate groups together, have discussions around the current and future state, how to improve things. We have to manage projects across the business, and we have to learn and improve over time. If we do this, we can move from being an analytics hopeful to an analytics competitor. But I want to be very, very clear. The journey from there to there is not linear as suggested in this graphic. It looks more like this. And I don't mean this to be funny. I mean it to be true, because it is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And you have to socialize with leaders, and you have to understand, if you're a leader yourself, that this is a learning journey, that not every project is going to be, great and going to solve, all the problems that you would hope it to. We have to learn. We have to persist. And how do you learn? You practice. You do it over and over and over, and you get better and better at it over time. So finally, the 4 key skills that I would like everyone on this webinar conference to consider having is a learning mindset or growth mindset, as is highlighted by Carol Dweck in the book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, which has been very influential at Microsoft and many organizations around the world now. Systematic thinking. So it's not only people, it's customers, it's the communities in which we do business, it is all stakeholders, and we have to think about systems when we're doing this work. We have to be expert communicators, not only in packaging stories and communicating out, but we have to do the work beforehand to understand what our internal customers want or need, and be attentive to what they should be asking for that they're not. And in other words, putting our subject matter expertise and bringing that to the fore to, hey, coach them up, and so give them some guidance on what the best next step would be. And finally, we have to be comfortable with uncertainty, the idea of probabilistic scenarios. When you talk about human behavior, particularly human behavior at scale, it is not predictable. I don't like the term predictive and prescriptive analytics, for the record. We have to be comfortable in dealing with probabilities. Hey, I'm 80% confident, I'm 30% confident. That is a healthy, appropriate conversation. The idea that A plus B equals C is not the right way to think about it. It's A exists. If we do B, C will result with a degree of confidence of 70% or whatever the case is. So that's the language that we have to be comfortable with. So finally, what do we discuss as I went through this? Well, we discussed well-being and performance, capability, capacity, inclusion, and how it affects engagement, the data to change process, talent strategy and workforce planning, continuous work transformation, and the best next steps. And I'll just highlight this word, appropriate. Appropriate data leads to appropriate insights, which leads to appropriate action through the data to change process. So hope you found that helpful. Spasibo vam bolshoi. So I'm happy to take questions. Anna, how was that?
Yeah, that was absolutely wonderful, Al. Thank you very much. And in fact, I think your presentation just set up the whole conference day, because you have touched so many aspects, which we're going to talk about at our conference. So wonderful. And yes, we do have a number of questions for you. Maybe some of them are more relevant, some maybe less, but still you're an expert. So try to answer what you could. Okay. So anyway, one of the questions from our audience is like, what do you think? Well-being and performance, they really opposite each other or they go along each other?
This is a great question. I don't think they're necessarily opposite, because if someone performs well, they're actually going to feel good about themselves. There's satisfaction in doing good work. So I don't mean to contend that they're polar opposites, that you can't have one without the other. It's just understanding the balance between the two. The key theme I want to take away, that there are trade-offs, and most leaders, both business leaders at a very large macro level and team leaders, don't really understand the true balance between well-being and performance. And that is the work that Sanya Lacina is doing at Question Pro, that Rob Cross is doing at Connected Commons. So understanding that dynamic is our challenge and opportunity in people analytics, and in fact HR, as we move forward, given this new dynamic of hybrid work and globalization.
Thank you, Alf. Also, are people asking, what do you think, which areas of HR are the most crucial for data-driven decisions? And in other words, if you just new HR, in the company, what would you start with?
Yeah, well, recruiting is one. The other would be internal development and mobility would be another. Compensation or total rewards would be another. And the other one that's top of mind would be diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that relates to culture and how the employee experience unfolds for people. One of the things that I and others in this field are very committed to is this notion of psychological safety. So not only physical safety, but psychological and emotional safety. So do I feel like I can bring my true authentic self to work and offer ideas without being pushed down and shamed? So that is a really important thing to understand at scale, because I have a culture that's scared and timid. They're not going to innovate and be productive. If I have a culture where people truly feel safe and that they feel that they belong, that's going to be a high performing organization.
Okay. Also, we have another question, quite interesting, and I think it's also to do with our further topics on employee disengagement. So your opinion, what do you think, whether in analytics you can predict the people disengagement, and how would you, that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is maybe your advice, how to effectively deal with people who are really disengaged.
Well, two things. Can you predict who is going to be engaged and disengaged? Yes, you can. That in turn affects or helps predict productivity, helps predict whether or not they're going to stay or go. But there becomes an ethical question. Is that something that you should do? And so I'll just highlight what Ernest Ning and others do at Salesforce. They don't do that work. And they don't do it consciously. They can do it from an analytical perspective, but they choose not to, because their feeling is that it would compromise the trust of those within that workforce. And I like the fact that they've put a stand and say, hey, I'm not going to do this predictive analytics because it's not going to help in the way. In fact, it could even be counterproductive. The second part of that question was, how do you deal with disengaged people? What I often reference is one of the books that I went by real quick, Good to Great, by Jim Collins. He contends early in the book is that it's not the challenge of leaders and organizations to motivate and engage people. It's actually the challenge of leaders and organizations to hire motivated, engaged people and do their best not to disengage them, not to demotivate them. So if someone needs to be motivated, then you have to, was that a good hire? What in fact demotivated them? I mean, the simple answer is, if that's a reality in your organization, what's demotivating them, what's disengaging them, and get rid of it. So that's easier said than done.
Yeah, just to get it. Okay. Also, another question while people are asking is like often management and HR, they seem to perceive well-being as a personal matter. Yeah. So they don't address it maybe much in many companies,
Mm.
and they don't take responsibility for it either. So what do you think? How can we efficiently raise more awareness, and take action?
Yeah. Well, well-being was being discussed by Jeffrey Pfeffer and others before COVID. Once COVID happened, then well-being became front and center for obvious reasons. People's health and their availability to work became a priority. Then people started asking, well, what's well-being all about? It's not only physical health, it's mental health, it's emotional health, and they're working from home. So like I shared before, there's kids running around, there's elder parents that need caring for. So it became very, very difficult. And I do not know what's happening there in Russia and the CIS, but what I do know here in the States is that many women in particular were struggling really, really bad. And they said, I'm out, and they're sacrificing too much. I mean, again, we're all constrained by time. We need to sleep. We need to eat. We need to have meaningful relationships. So it is the responsibility of the employer to understand well-being and not to compromise that. It's not only the right thing to do from a humanistic standpoint, it actually makes good business sense. And there's a lot of data that is pre-COVID and now post-COVID shows that. It is a non-negotiable that leaders have to look at well-being in this day and age. If they're not, I would go so far as that they're being irresponsible.
Okay, interesting. Also, you have touched, but I'm sure ask some other speakers this issue because, like for Russia, we're only touching the sphere of inclusion and diversity. So what is, in your opinion, having lived in the culture with inclusion and diversity, what in your opinion is the difference between inclusion and diversity?
Well, inclusion goes to the feeling that I am part of this group, part of this team, part of this organization, and that relates to this feeling of belonging. Diversity is really about the profile of the organization. In other words, does it accurately reflect my customer base? Does it accurately reflect the people and prospective employees within my community? Is it really something that is, how would I say, I was trying to get fancy and find a Russian term, but I'm not going to be able to do it. But it's really that, hey, I am creating a feeling of inclusion and belonging, and diversity is really, am I hitting this idea that, or am I achieving this idea of accurately reflecting my customer base and the communities and pool of prospective workers in my industry and my geography and what have you. So those are the key distinctions between the two.
Okay, I see. Thank you all very much. And I think one of the last questions for you is like your personal, I would say, like personal question for you is like you have really surely great workload. So how do you find like energy like to perform effectively? So this is the key insight for our HR audience.
I wake up early, obviously.
Yeah, that's true.
No, it's I'll answer it seriously. Sleep is a huge priority. Hydration, eat well. I play beach volleyball, and I take care of the relationships that are important to me in my life, namely with my kids and my partner. And it's something that I prioritize. If I ever go back with a large employer, I am not going to compromise that. So there's a balance between an individual standing up for him or herself and saying, this is what I need in my life, and this is the way I'm going to live my life, and an employer allowing the room, the elasticity to actually have that happen individual to individual throughout the organization, and not just for executives or people who have been there a long time, to actually make it a way of being, and making sure on the other side that people don't take advantage because there are people who might take advantage. And if that's the case, there has to be accountability measures, that there has to be repercussions, so people don't feel that they're being taken advantage of. So I take care of myself: sleep, hydration, good food, play beach volleyball, and take care of the relationships in my life.
I see. Al, thank you very much. That was absolutely wonderful beginning for our conference, and just sure want to remind everyone that we will send, for those of you who are very active, like we'll be ready to send all our materials, and I'll just thank you again, and I think, yes, just go to sleep.
I'm just trying. My work day started now. I'm ready to go.
Okay, it's wonderful. Like if you start at 4 o'clock, what time do you finish?
Yeah, 2 o'clock. I'm going to take a nap today for sure. But yeah, большое спасибо. Take care.
Большое спасибо, and have a great day. Okay.
All right, you as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.